Hi everyone, my name is Pamela Nuri, Head of Expedition Operations at Noble Caledonia, and we have with us John Love from South US in the Outer Hebrides. We have a load of British Isles cruises going on in the next couple of years, and John is not only our resident guest speaker, birder, historian, anthropologist, archaeologist, but being from the Outer Hebrides himself, there's very few people who know not only the islands and all the little secrets around the islands, but some of the most wonderful stories that have taken place over the history of these islands and the natural history. So it is such a treat, John, when we have you on our voyages every season, but it's also such a treat to have you here to chat to us about the hidden secrets of the Outer Hebrides. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Lovely to see you, Pam. And yes, we're relatively COVID-free, so it's been relatively easy being here.
So good to hear. Now, when I asked John, all right, John, we're going to zoom right into some of the real hidden secrets of the Outer Hebrides, the ones that people maybe know less about, or the ones that are just your favorite areas and your favorite secret gems. And I was sort of overjoyed to see the ones that John chose as his favorite places. And I think the intriguing part is that a lot of these places won't pop up on the actual itinerary because they're really quite hard to get to, and they will just be these opportunistic little isles that we sometimes just pass by with the ship and we point it out and tell you about them. But occasionally we can drop the Zodiacs and do a little cruise, and even more occasionally we can actually make landings on some of these magic islands. So let me share the screen with you here. There we go. I've got a map here of the, well, it's Hebrides and a lot of Scotland all the way up to Orkney. And John has picked quite a few really, really special, unknown, hard to reach places. And I'll thank you so much, John, if you'd like to tell us a bit about which is your absolute favorite of these. And I believe it is this one.
Yes, that's right. It was probably, I'm actually from Inverness originally, but I've lived in Scotland all my life. I went to university in Aberdeen, which was on your map, and I've been on the South US and the Outer Hebrides for about 28 years now. And in 1971, as a student, I got the chance to go to North Rona with 5 people whom I didn't really know at the time. One was a lecturer at the university and some friends of his. 4 of them were from the Isle of Lewis and all Gaelic speakers. And we remained really close friends ever since that day. I'm still in touch. 2 have sadly passed on, but I'm still in touch with 3 of them regularly to this day. And Finlay, who organized it, was descended from a man who served as a shepherd here in the early 1800s. And he was always desperate to go. So he chartered a fishing boat to take us, and we camped there for 2 weeks. And I've been back about 15 times since, sometimes camping for a week or 2 at a time, sometimes just on a day trip. And it's, as Pam said, it's very difficult to land there. This was actually near one of the landing places, and we were camped in the village, which you can see on the skyline there, and all the lazy beds where they cultivated. There were probably about 4 families there at one time, but it was reduced to 1 shepherd family by 1844. And then the bump on the right-hand end of the skyline is the old chapel, and that was occupied, set up by Saint Ronan. Ron is the Gaelic name for seals, and there was a big seal colony here. So it's quite difficult to land, and it's quite hard work when you go ashore, but even from the boat you can get a good view of the village and also the surrounding cliffs where there are good seabird colonies. So the village is the site of one of only 4 or 5 breeding colonies of Leach's petrels. And not only is North Rona my favorite island, but this is my favorite bird. We started ringing them back in 1971. I've ringed several, about 1,000 or more over the years. One of them was recaught. I had ringed in North Rona in 1972, and it was recaught 30 years later. It's about the size of a blackbird. It's sometimes called the Leach's fork-tailed petrel. This photo doesn't particularly show it, but it's slightly larger than the storm petrel, which is the smaller, more widespread one that we often see. And we've had them land on the ship. This was one that actually turned up on one of the cruise ships overnight, and the crew found it and brought it to me and took a few photos, and then we let it go again. So they're sometimes attracted to lights around the ship, like moths, particularly on misty nights and things. They get a bit confused.
So John, I just wanted to show the map again, because North Rona is all the way up here. It's so far out to sea. It's really exposed. It's really in the middle of nowhere. And we actually often pass it by, maybe on the way up to the Faroes or so on. Or it's not such a huge detour from the Outer Hebrides, but there's so many factors, like, can we make the detour out there if the sea's nice and calm? And when it is, you think, could we just, circumnavigate by vessel? Could we get close? Could we launch the Zodiac? So really just to put it in perspective of how exposed it is, as well as the one you chose just to the west of it, Suliskia.
Yeah, North Rona is 45 miles from the Butt of Lewis and the same distance from Cape Wrath in a triangle. And Suliskia is about 12 miles west. It's even more difficult to land on. I've only been on it 3 or 4 times, and it would be very difficult to take passengers there because it is just chock-a-block with nesting birds, fulmars and gannets in particular. And the men from Ness in Lewis, at the northern tip of Lewis, go out there every year, every August, under a special license that is granted by the government to harvest about 2,000 of the young gannets. It's called gugas. They're quite a treat, but it's a nice place to circumnavigate on the ship because it's a good solid platform, and you can see the gannets and the gannet colony. That temporary lighthouse was built about 1990. That's a fishing boat from the Outer Hebrides, just getting a bit of shelter in there. So the gannets are about 9,000 breeding pairs, and despite the annual harvest of a couple of thousand chicks, the numbers have remained fairly stable. But another place that is, we can sometimes make a slight detour to see if we're on the way to or from St. Kilda, are the Flannan Isles. And they're uninhabited, and there is a small gannet colony there. Again, cruising around in the ship, that's an aerial photograph of the lighthouse that's there. It's automatic. It was one of the first to go automatic about 1970 because of what I'll say in a moment. But going around in the ship, you get a nice view of, we seem to pass it at sunset, having been on St. Kilda all day. And then sometimes if you get a telephoto lens or through binoculars, you get spectacular views of the rocks and the gannet colony. Yeah, that's it. At sunset, there's the gannet colony. That was only established in 1969, probably an overspill from St. Kilda and Sulishker, and it's built up to, I think it's about 4,000 or 5,000 breeding pairs now. Very spectacular place. Again, I've camped there, but only one night. And the landing stage is really very tricky. This was in 1981 when we landed. This was built especially to service a lighthouse and the lighthouse keepers. It was built in about 1899, 1900, and it hasn't been maintained, and it's even more difficult to land there. But that landing stage is so exposed to the full force of the Atlantic. It was here that 3 lighthouse keepers in 1900, within a year of the lighthouse coming operational, 3 of the lighthouse keepers disappeared. The lighthouse, very moody place, that's a chapel which again belonged to a Celtic monk, and that's where I was able to catch some more leeches petrels, because the Flannans are another place they breed, as a few in Sulishker and St Kilda and a few in Shetland. So the lighthouse keeper, Thomas Marshall, is one of the 3 men that disappeared, and nobody knows what happened, but there was a violent storm and they must have gone down to the landing stage to secure the gear and got swept off in the huge waves that can hit the island. And I was intrigued just a few weeks ago to get an email from a descendant of this man. And he came from Ayrshire, and his grandfather was called Thomas Love. And my grandfather came from Ayrshire, Glasgow area, where there are quite a few Loves. And we're now trying to figure out whether I'm related to this family, which might explain my passion for lighthouses and places like the Flannans and other islands like that. But
is there not that wonderful poem, I'm sure you have recited it a few times on board, about the lighthouse keeper? It's such a fantastic poem. It sets such a mood that this image just sort of really reminds you of.
Exactly. And the poem, actually, there's a bit of a poetic license in it. It tries to recreate an image like the Mary Celeste or other situations where the lighthouse, there was an unfinished meal in an overtoppled chair, but in fact there wasn't. But it adds to the mood, certainly.
Absolutely. So I'd like to just introduce this handsome fellow, Mike Bowen. He's one of our British Royal Marines who comes with us on many of our voyages nowadays. And which islands are these, John?
These are the Shant Islands, sometimes called Shiants, but I think in the area they're referred to the Shant Islands. There's 3 big ones. These 2 are joined by a causeway, a natural causeway at low tide, well, most states of the tide. And there's a 3rd one behind us where we're in the Zodiac. But you can see they're pretty rocky and mountainous, I suppose, hilly. Quite hard work if you go ashore, if you can get ashore. But as you well know, Pam, it's a fantastic Zodiac cruise, which we will try and achieve, if possible, as an add-in to the destination. And it's a volcanic area. St Kilda and the Shants are about the only 2 areas of volcanic rock in the outer Hebrides. But the inner Hebrides, and particularly Staffa, have these volcanic basalt columns. But the ones on the Shants are about 150 meters high. The ones on Staffa, which are spectacular enough, are only about 10 meters high.
Yeah,
So
you
it's
can see the
amazing
little
going around.
zodiac in the bottom of the screen here. It's so wonderful for scale. And John, I just wanted to mention that
Indeed.
although the shunts are here and they're seemingly much more sheltered and protected here in the Minch as compared to these outer Hebridean Isles, it's actually not a given that it will be sheltered inside there. You can have some really roaring currents and winds funneling through there. So again, it's always a coup to, it's lovely to pass by ship. It's a coup if we can get in the zodiacs. And, you know, because it's got sort of three sides around the island, there's oftentimes we hope to get shelter on one of the sides. But the wildlife here, apart from the geology you just mentioned, is such a treat.
Yes, and in fact, the locals obviously have known about the currents around the Shants for a long, long time. There's a Gaelic tradition called the Blue Men of the Minch that will suck boats and wreck boats that are passing between the Shants and the Isle of Lewis and Harris. So it is a dangerous place. But if we're lucky enough, then it can be really quite exciting. And landing, it's almost not worth landing because you won't see much, but you get a tremendous treat going around if you can, as you say, due to weather. That's the ship, the Serenissima, anchored in the Shants, around the Shants, and you can see the number of auks, guillemots and razorbills around the ship, and puffins as well are in there. And it's an amazing experience, and you're in amongst it from the ship and also on the Zodiac. The puffins, of course, are everybody's favorite, and you get this close to them. It's just quite astonishing. But you see lots of other things as well. It's a good place for seals, Atlantic grey seals. Probably breed here, but they come right up to the Zodiac sometimes. Also a good place for other birds. These are sea eagles, immature white-tailed sea eagles. They don't have the white tail, which feed on auks and puffins and gulls and all sorts of fish. Local fishermen often like throwing fish for them off the boat, and get good views of them. And they're quite close to the island of Stornoway, the town of Stornoway, or we're going to Mingulay first, I think, aren't we?
Yes, I think you included Mingulay next on your top selection. And I was so glad you did. It's one of those landings that's slightly an awkward wet landing because technically it's a wet landing. People have to get their feet wet to go ashore. But if it's a calm day, we really do our utmost to try and let them hop right off the front of the Zodiac and avoid getting their feet wet. But it is well worth it, even if they had to get their feet wet, to get to this little far south little treat in the whole Hebrides.
Yes, it's a penultimate island in the Outer Hebrides chain, the southernmost island. Berneray or Barra Head is the one right at the tip. The beach, often from the ship, the beach looks landable, but there can be quite a swell running and very difficult to get the Zodiacs near the shore. But this was a particularly calm day, and we had a basking shark swimming around, watching us, I suppose, or gaping with its mouth open for plankton. So, but if you do get ashore, the beaches on the east side are amazing and very attractive island altogether. And just at the back of the beach, there is, on the left of the photo there, you can't see it, but the next photo shows the village. And this had up to 150 people living here until the last of them were evacuated in 1912. And the village has just been inundated by sand now. The ruin up at the back is the priest's house, but I knew an old man in Barra, in Battersea, in fact, whose mother was born and brought up here before the evacuation, and they moved to Battersea near Barra. So there's lots to see in Mingulay, and if you hike up to the back, the west side, which is a lot more exposed, there are some very dramatic cliffs up to about 700 feet high. This is a stack called Leonimal. There's another stack like it just off the picture to the left called Arnimal. And Arn is an old name, or the Norse name, for sea eagles. So there used to be a pair of sea eagles listed here. The islanders themselves were renowned for rock climbing. Unlike the St. Kildans, they didn't often use a rope. But they gathered seabirds here as quite a feature for their survival. Fishing wasn't really an option.
I was going to say, John, you know, until now, a lot of these places are little moonshot places, surprises, bonuses, you know, unexpected landings. So, John, you know, Mingale and Shiants are places that we will actually feature in the brochure because there's a reasonable chance of getting something done there, as opposed to Flannan or Thrones, Suliske. You'll very seldom see them well featured in the brochure just because they're more likely to be a ship's passing in the night sort of situation. But now moving on to, I see you selected some places that are not just a moonshot, not just a difficult landing, but actually much more reliable places to try and aim to get to. And so thanks for including some of those as well. We've got here the lovely Castle Bay, just further north from Mingale.
Yes, we've got, it's a sheltered harbour, and the ferry comes in there, but we usually moor off and Zodiac ashore and can get access sometimes to the castle, Kishamil's castle, which was the seat of the clan, the chief of the clan MacNeil. About 90% of people in Barra are called MacNeil. So we can either also sometimes link up with the local bus service, a minibus that goes around the island. It's about 15-mile round trip around the island of Barra, which has about 1,000 people on it. And at the north end is the airport, which is unique in Britain, if not the world, in the plane, a Loganair Twin Otter, for the experience of landing on the beach.
And apart from anything else, I would not want to be the mechanic who has to deal with all the salt water getting into all the airplane parts for this operation.
Well, that's a good point, Pam, because the Twin Otter is about the only one that can do it successfully because it is fixed undercarriage. All the other ones they've tried is exactly what you say, that the salt is a really serious problem. So it's about the only Twin Otters in the fleet in Britain. So it's quite an experience. A friend of mine was a pilot, and he said that when they came in to Barra at the north end, Yollagary, they had to fly low over the beach to scare the gulls off. And if the gulls were standing and you couldn't see their legs, the tide wasn't out far enough. So,
you know what I just
but
love?
it's a beautiful island.
The Outer Hebrides, and just talking about these little stories, is that, you know, coming from the Southern Hemisphere, I thought everything, you know, around the United Kingdom and Ireland would have been completely overdeveloped, you know, very loads of infrastructure and buildings and people. And I just have always been absolutely blown away by the lovely rural simplicity and wilderness that you can find out here in the Outer Hebrides. Really, really is world class. So I didn't actually put Castle Bay on the map there, but it's just north of Mingale. And then now we go to our backup plan. It's not only a backup plan, it's a fantastic landing that we always try and do, is in the great city or small city of Stornoway on Lewis.
Yes, it's the only place the ship can dock in the Outer Hebrides. So it gives us a chance to go ashore and have a coach tour around some of the famous archaeological sites in Lewis in particular. This is an aerial shot I took from the plane of the Callanish standing stones, which are Neolithic and probably older than Stonehenge. And it's a quite a coincidence that they're shaped like a Celtic cross, but they predate Christianity by about 2,000 years or more. This is just a moody shot from the road as you go past. A lot of people think, well, what were they for? And there have been hordes of ideas as to their function as a solar observatory. But I have this theory of my own that there were no trees in the Outer Hebrides, or very few. And in prehistoric times, of course, there wouldn't have been any lampposts. So I like to think that they put them up just to give the dogs somewhere to pee against. And this proves my point. The other nice thing about Lewis on the coach tour, we sometimes call in at the Garranan Black House village, which has been restored, and it's a hostel and a museum and all sorts. Always get a nice welcome there. There's a tea shop there, and it's very picturesque. And Lewis, of course, is famous for the chess set, which goes back to Viking times, 12th century. Stornoway Museum has a few, 7 I think, that were donated or on loan from Edinburgh, which has about a dozen of them, but 60 of them are in the British Museum in London, which the locals get quite miffed about, that why should they be down there and not? But at least they're on the island. The wonderful things, they're about 2 or 3 inches tall, beautifully carved out of narwhal ivory. Always worth a visit to the museum, which is now in the wooded area near Stornoway, within Stornoway. So it's always a good stop if you can get into Stornoway.
Yeah,
you get a
John,
bit of shopping.
you know, I mentioned it as being a backup, and that's not true at all. We very often include it as a major highlight of a place to visit. But occasionally when it's not originally included and we have a storm come through and we can't do one of the more difficult islands to get to that we were meant to, I have been absolutely amazed how we can phone them up the day before and say, hey guys, we have 100 passengers, can we do a full day tour with lunch? And they pull buses and guides and lunch out of the hat for us, and it is just so lovely. It's a small enough town and a big enough town for our purposes in that way, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and it's I've filled in as a guide on the coach because I know Lewis well, yeah. And so I've often been out there and got roped in as a guide on the coaches as well. So it's a super stop. And just to end with a few things, the Zodiacs are the secret weapon of small boat cruising, and you get fabulous views. We saw the seals and the puffins and auks and things, and here we've got bottlenose dolphin beside the Zodiac. There's 2 of them there, and also common dolphins in the Minch are quite common. Barra's a good place for the bottlenose and basking sharks, and common dolphins in the Minch between Lewis, the Outer Hebrides, and the mainland.
So John, so anyone who knows you or knows the types of adventures we do around the Hebrides will have noted that there is one glaring omission here, and that is, of course, St. Kilda, because when we discussed what we would talk about, we realized that St. Kilda would have to take up an entire little interview of its own, so that I'm really looking forward to chatting to you about that next week. But yeah, I love those little dolphin shots at the end there. It just reminds you of when you're cruising around out here, you're so close to, you know, what I always think of as being the center of civilization there in the UK or London, and you're so close, and yet you really just feel as though you've gone out into the middle of nowhere, you've gone out into history, you've gone out into the Atlantic, and it's just so enchanting to go around and learn about all the stories and places and feel the same gamble that we have to take, that, you know, will we get close to North Rona, is the same gamble or question that's been going on for centuries. And so it's just such a wonderful way to engage with these islands, cruising around.
Yeah, and that's why I like the Hebrides, I think, and a lot of the team members think that they're some of the finest cruise destination around on a world scale even. And if you can't do something, you can always find somewhere else that is sheltered to go and explore. And that's where you come in as the expedition leader, cruise director, and the captain, and coming up with decisions like that, which it's a bit of a mystery tour sometimes if the weather's not kind, but we always score, even if it's wet and midges, the passengers still enjoy it.
Yeah, well, John, I have to say, having a character like you along with all your knowledge and history really brings these places alive, because we could go to another archipelago in Indonesia or something like that, and of course there's going to be all this, you know, fantastic history, but if we don't have someone like you to really engage and bring it alive and tell all the stories, it's not nearly as good. So it's such a lovely privilege to have you not only doing this talk now, but on the voyages, and I can't wait to get back out to sea again soon.
It's always nice. I enjoy showing these places to people and going on obsessed about it, so forgive me for that, but thanks for.
Well, it shows, and that's why we hope to keep you around forever and ever and ever. And if I didn't mention, and now it will be obvious, that John is the godfather of the Hebridean skies, so that's where we might see you next. Anyway, John, I can see the connections getting a little fuzzy there. But thank you so much for your time, and we will be doing St. Kilda in its whole own feature coming up soon.
Good. Great to see you, Pam.
Okay,
Thanks
bye,
again.
John.
Cheers.